Worship is not measured by volume. It is not defined by melody, emotion, or how many hands are raised in a room. Worship is measured by truth. Not every song sung in a church reaches heaven. Some stop at the ceiling. Some echo only among people. And some, though popular, poetic, and powerful, miss the heart of God entirely. This is not about music. This is about meaning. The first song that offends God is the song of empty praise. Words that declare surrender while the life refuses obedience. Lyrics that say, I give you all, while the heart holds back forgiveness, integrity, and humility. God is not impressed by what is sung loudly if it is lived weakly. Praise without alignment becomes noise. The second song is the song of performance, when worship becomes a stage and God becomes an audience. When voices seek applause instead of presence. God does not listen for perfection, He listens for sincerity. A broken whisper offered honestly is worth more than a flawless song offered for attention. The third song is the song that promises blessing without transformation. Songs that celebrate crowns without crosses, victory without obedience, grace without repentance. God does not bless comfort-driven faith. He honors hearts willing to change, not just rejoice. The fourth song is the song that replaces relationship with repetition, singing the same words week after week without reflection, without conviction, without response. When worship becomes routine, reverence fades. God desires connection, not habit. Presence, not autopilot. The fifth song is the song that speaks faith but lives fear. Lyrics that declare trust while decisions are ruled by anxiety. Words that proclaim surrender while control is never released. Faith is not proven by singing about trust. It is proven by walking in it. God hears both the song and the silence of your actions. The sixth song is the song that centers self instead of surrender. When worship becomes about how it makes us feel rather than who God is. When emotion replaces reverence. God is not a tool for inspiration. He is the object of worship. True worship humbles the singer before it uplifts the soul. This message is not meant to silence worship. It is meant to purify it. God is not offended by imperfect voices. He is moved by honest hearts. The question is not, did you sing? The question is, did you mean it? Because the worship that reaches God is not the loudest, not the most polished, not the most popular. Worship begins with truth, not sound. It is easy to assume that volume equals sincerity, that emotion equals devotion, and that passion in music reflects alignment in the heart. But sound has never been the measure of worship. Truth has. A song can be loud and still be empty. A room can be full and still be distant from God. What reaches heaven is not how strongly words are projected, but how honestly they are lived. Words spoken in worship carry weight. When they are disconnected from reality, they lose meaning. Singing about surrender while clinging to pride creates a contradiction. Declaring holiness while excusing hidden compromise creates distance. God is not persuaded by lyrical declarations that the heart has no intention of honoring. He listens beyond the melody. He weighs truth against behavior. Emotion is powerful, but emotion alone is not worship. Music can stir feelings quickly, sometimes without reflection. Tears can fall, hands can rise, and yet the heart may remain unchanged. Emotion without truth fades as quickly as it comes. True worship is not momentary feeling, it is enduring alignment. It does not disappear when the music ends or when the atmosphere shifts. Truth in worship requires self-awareness. It asks uncomfortable questions. Do the words I sing match the life I live? Do I mean what I declare, or am I repeating what sounds right? Worship loses integrity when it becomes poetic language detached from honest intention. God does not need to be reminded of who He is. Worship is meant to remind us of who we are before Him. There is a difference between singing about obedience and walking in it, singing about trust and actually releasing control, singing about love and practicing forgiveness. Truth demands consistency. When worship becomes aspirational language with no commitment to growth, it becomes hollow. God is patient, but He is not fooled by performance disguised as devotion. The danger of empty praise is that it can feel spiritually productive without producing spiritual change. A person may leave feeling uplifted but unchanged, inspired but uncommitted. Over time, this creates a false sense of closeness. Familiarity with worship language replaces genuine intimacy. Words become easy to say because they no longer challenge behavior. God values honesty over perfection. A simple, imperfect expression rooted in truth is more meaningful than polished words rooted in pretense. He is not offended by weakness acknowledged. He is resisted by hypocrisy ignored. Worship does not require strength. It requires truth. Even silence offered sincerely is more authentic than a song offered falsely. When truth is absent, worship becomes noise. Noise can be impressive, but it has no depth. It fills space without transforming it. God has never responded to noise alone. Throughout history, his response has always been to hearts aligned with truth, not crowds aligned with sound. The heart that trembles at truth honors him more than the voice that avoids it. Truth-centered worship humbles rather than elevates ego. It confronts self-deception. It does not allow the singer to hide behind harmony or lyrics. Instead, it exposes inconsistency gently but clearly. This exposure is not condemnation, it is invitation, an invitation to realignment, repentance, and growth. When worship is truthful, it reshapes priorities. Words are no longer chosen for how they sound, but for what they mean. Declarations become commitments. Praise becomes a reminder of responsibility. Singing about surrender begins to affect decisions. Singing about faith begins to affect reactions. Truth bridges the gap between expression and action. Empty praise often focuses on what God can do rather than who he is. Truthful worship centers on reverence, not reward. It honors God even when circumstances do not change. It praises without negotiation. This kind of worship is quieter but deeper. It does not rely on atmosphere, it creates one internally. Truth also protects worship from manipulation. When sound and emotion are prioritized over meaning, worship can be used to control feeling rather than cultivate faith. Truth anchors worship in reality. It prevents emotional highs from replacing spiritual maturity. It keeps worship grounded, honest, and enduring. God is not offended by emotion, but he is not moved by it alone. Emotion is a response. Truth is a foundation. Without truth, emotion floats without direction. With truth, emotion strengthens conviction. Worship that honors God engages both, but never sacrifices truth for feeling. The purpose of worship is not to impress God or inspire others. It is to align the heart with reality. Reality about who God is and who we are in relation to him. When that alignment exists, sound becomes secondary. Volume becomes irrelevant. What matters is integrity. Truth-filled worship continues beyond the song. It influences speech, decisions, and behavior. It shapes character quietly. It is consistent in private and public. It does not need a stage to exist. It flows naturally because it is rooted honestly. When worship returns to truth, it regains power. Not emotional power alone, but transformative power. Power that changes direction, not just mood. Power that reaches God because it begins with honesty. Performance and routine can quietly replace real worship when intention is lost. What begins as a sincere offering can slowly shift into something familiar, polished, and predictable. The danger is not in preparation or excellence, but in forgetting why worship exists in the first place. When worship becomes something to present rather than something to offer, the focus moves away from God and toward appearance. Performance enters worship when attention subtly changes direction. The concern becomes how it sounds, how it looks, how it is received. Voices aim for perfection, timing becomes critical, and emotion is carefully crafted. None of these things are wrong on their own, but they become misplaced when approval replaces presence. Worship was never meant to impress people. The moment it does, God is no longer at the center. Routine enters when repetition replaces reflection. The same songs are sung, the same words repeated, the same moments expected. Familiarity can be comforting, but it can also dull awareness. When worship becomes automatic, the heart disengages. Lips move while the mind wanders. Words are spoken without being considered. Over time, repetition without intention turns sacred moments into habits. God desires awareness, not autopilot, relationship, not ritual. Routine can make worship efficient, but efficiency is not intimacy. Relationships weaken when interaction becomes mechanical. In the same way, worship loses depth when it is reduced to sequence and structure alone. God is not responding to order. He is responding to sincerity. Performance also creates distance between honesty and expression. When worship becomes a role to play, vulnerability decreases. Weakness is hidden. Struggle is masked. People feel pressure to appear strong, faithful, and confident, even when they are not. This pressure discourages honesty, yet honesty is the very thing that invites God's presence. God does not ask for polished faith. He asks for real faith, faith that admits doubt, faith that acknowledges struggle, faith that brings questions instead of hiding them behind rehearsed words. Performance creates a false environment where authenticity feels risky. Worship becomes safer than truth, and that safety becomes a barrier. Routine without reflection also removes responsibility. Words about surrender are sung without surrender being practiced. Words about love are repeated without love being lived. When worship does not challenge behavior, it becomes disconnected from life. God never intended worship to be confined to a moment. It was meant to shape character. When worship becomes routine, reverence fades, not suddenly, but gradually. What once felt sacred becomes expected. Awe is replaced by familiarity. The heart stops responding with wonder because it already knows what comes next. God does not lose holiness in these moments, but perception dulls. Reverence requires awareness, and awareness requires intention. Performance-driven worship often values outcome over offering. The goal becomes creating an emotional response rather than cultivating spiritual alignment. Emotion is powerful, but it is not proof of connection. A person can feel moved and still remain unchanged. God is not seeking emotional reaction. He is seeking transformed hearts. There is also a subtle danger in measuring worship by visible response. Raised hands, tears, silence, or applause can all be genuine, but they are not guarantees of sincerity. When these responses become the standard, worshippers may feel pressured to display emotion even when they are wrestling internally. God is not deceived by visible signs. He sees the heart beneath them. Routine worship can also create spiritual complacency. When songs become familiar, their words lose weight. Declarations that once challenged the soul become background noise. Growth slows because nothing disrupts comfort. God often works through discomfort, through conviction, through moments that interrupt routine. When worship avoids discomfort entirely, it avoids transformation. God desires engagement, not attendance, presence, not performance, attention, not habit. He is not impressed by flawless execution if the heart is absent. He is moved by sincerity, even when it is messy and unpolished. A hesitant prayer offered honestly honors Him more than a confident song offered mechanically. Breaking free from routine does not require abandoning structure. It requires restoring intention, asking what the words mean, allowing space for reflection, choosing honesty over appearance. Worship becomes real again when people are more concerned with alignment than approval. God invites worshippers into relationship, not repetition. Relationship listens as much as it speaks. It responds rather than recites. It remains sensitive rather than scripted. Worship that honors God remains flexible, aware, and alive because it is rooted in connection. When performance fades and routine is questioned, worship regains depth. It becomes less about doing things correctly and more about being present truthfully. God is not distant in these moments. He has always been near, waiting not for better sound or better structure, but for honest engagement. True worship does not depend on atmosphere, skill, or repetition. It depends on the heart's posture. When that posture is sincere, even the simplest expression becomes powerful. When it is absent, even the most impressive presentation becomes empty. True worship cannot remain confined to words alone. If it does, it loses its integrity. Singing about faith without living it creates a fracture between expression and reality. God is not honored by declarations that end when the music stops. Worship that pleases Him continues in choices, behavior, and posture long after the final note fades. It is possible to sing about surrender while resisting obedience, to sing about love while holding resentment, to sing about trust while living in fear and control. These contradictions are not always intentional, but they reveal a deeper issue. Worship has been reduced to expression rather than embodiment. God listens to both the song and the life that follows it. When they contradict each other, the song loses its meaning. Living worship requires alignment. What is spoken publicly must be practiced privately. Faith is not proven in harmony. It is proven in decision-making. It shows up in how forgiveness is offered, how integrity is protected, how humility is practiced. A worshipper cannot claim devotion in song and deny it in conduct without creating spiritual dissonance. Words have power, but only when they are supported by action. Declaring, "I trust you," means little if every decision is ruled by anxiety. Singing about surrender rings hollow when control is never released. God is not moved by aspirational language alone. He responds to lived faith, even when that faith is imperfect but honest. There is a temptation to use worship as a substitute for obedience. Singing can feel like participation without cost. It allows emotion without sacrifice. But worship was never meant to replace obedience. It was meant to flow from it. When obedience is absent, worship becomes a performance rather than a posture. Living worship also exposes priorities. What you value most will shape how you live, not just what you sing. If convenience consistently outweighs conviction, worship has not taken root. If comfort overrides calling, the song has not reached the heart. God is not asking for flawless living, but He is asking for sincere effort toward alignment. True worship follows you into ordinary moments. It shapes how you speak when no one is listening, how you act when it costs something, how you respond when emotions are high and patience is tested. These moments reveal whether worship is a habit or a lifestyle. Faith that remains in song but disappears in pressure is incomplete. Real faith holds when circumstances challenge it. Trust that only exists in music but collapses in uncertainty is still learning. God does not condemn this immaturity, but He does not celebrate pretending either. Growth begins when honesty replaces appearance. Living worship requires humility. It admits inconsistency without excusing it. It acknowledges struggle without hiding behind lyrics. God values this humility because it opens the door to transformation. A heart willing to change honors Him more than a voice unwilling to obey. When worship is lived, it becomes less about emotion and more about reverence. Emotion can initiate response, but reverence sustains it. Reverence shapes how God is approached, not just how He is sung about. It influences posture, attention, and obedience. This reverence remains even in silence. The disconnect between singing and living often develops gradually. Familiar words lose their weight. Repetition dulls conviction. Without reflection, lyrics become symbolic rather than directive. Worship stops shaping behavior and starts existing alongside it. This separation weakens spiritual awareness. God never intended worship to be compartmentalized. It was meant to permeate life, to influence thought patterns, moral choices, and relational conduct. Worship that honors God extends into daily rhythms. It informs how work is done, how people are treated, how truth is upheld. Living worship also requires courage. It is easier to sing than to change, easier to declare than to obey. Change invites discomfort. It confronts habits and exposes inconsistencies. But this discomfort is not punishment, it is invitation. Invitation into deeper alignment and genuine relationship. God is patient with growth, but he resists pretense. He draws near to sincerity. When worship is lived, it becomes less about perfection and more about direction. The heart may stumble, but it continues moving toward truth. That movement honors God. A life of worship does not require constant awareness of God's presence. It cultivates it. Awareness grows through intentional living, through choosing truth when compromise is easier, through choosing obedience when disobedience feels justified. These choices speak louder than any song. When worship is lived, it becomes credible. It carries weight. It reflects authenticity. Others may be moved not by the sound of the song, but by the consistency of the life behind it. Worship becomes testimony without explanation. God is not seeking flawless singers. He is seeking aligned hearts, hearts that mean what they sing and live what they declare. When worship moves beyond sound into action, it regains its power. It stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Worship was never meant to impress God with sound or move people with emotion alone. It was meant to align the heart with truth. When worship is reduced to performance, routine, or words without action, it loses its meaning. But when truth guides what is sung, sincerity replaces appearance, and faith is lived beyond the music, worship becomes powerful again. God is not seeking perfect voices or polished moments. He is seeking honest hearts, attentive minds, and lives that reflect what is declared. When the song ends, worship does not stop. It continues in obedience, humility, and reverence. And it is there, in that quiet alignment between word and life, that worship truly reaches him.